football is everything. And I knew my business head was saying I need to be in football. And then I was called into the boss's office. We've got good news for you and bad news for you. I said, right, let's start with the good news. And he says, you're the new face of Super Sunday and Monday Night Football. And I said, just what's the bad news? And he goes, you're going to be working with a guy called Gary Neville. And at the time I thought, oh no. The reason I got into journalism, coming back to what you're saying, is because I made an almighty cock-up and I became a journalist overnight. And I said, Sam, there's something I need to tell you. I'm leaving Premier League football.
As a football fan myself, I probably would have had the exact same reaction. But Dad's hanging around with Rooney. What?
I bought my first suit and I went into Ladbrokes Rayners Lane. No one wore a suit. I was the joker. I was ridiculed, and rather than staying for 10 days, I stayed for 3.5 years. I had braces on and my tie halfway down my front, and I do the odds and the Opta-stats on a show called 90 Minutes with Kirsty Gallagher and Matt Lorenzo, talking about the weekend's football. My career didn't get off to a great start, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm the Grim Reaper of television, this is never going to work. And one Sunday night, they let me go on Sky Sports News, 6 o'clock till midnight, with Mike Wedderburn and Ed Chamberlin. Racing, like so many other sports, it's got its problems, and the main problem for racing at the minute is financial. I've been following racing for 40 odd years and there's always a crisis on, and yet racing seems to carry on.
Welcome back to the Not Quite Pod. I'm very excited about today's episode. Today we have got Ed with us. Ed, do you just quickly want to introduce yourself and let everyone know a bit about yourself?
It's very kind of you to have me, Charlie. Thank you very much indeed. I am Ed Chamberlin. I'm currently the face of ITV Racing, I suppose. In my previous guise, I was the face of the Premier League for Super Sunday and Monday Night Football on Sky. And prior to that, I was a struggling sports presenter, to be honest with you, that has had a lot of luck during his career, which I'm sure we'll discuss.
I'm really excited to hear your story. And to start us off, I always get my guests to give us a bit of context about what their journey was like growing up and how that's led them to where they are today. So could you tell us a bit about your growing up and what it was like for you and where it all started, really?
So I was the son of a soldier. I've got 2 sisters, and growing up for us meant a lot of time abroad because, and it still happens now, you'd get posted to a different country for 2 years and then you'd come back to the UK for 2 years. So my childhood took in Germany numerous times because of the army bases there, but we went to Hong Kong, Borneo, we went to Belgium, all over the place really. So always on the go, but at the same time, my Hampshire roots were very strong for me. Always a big fan of Hampshire Cricket Club and Southampton Football Club, which isn't great at the moment, as you can imagine, but Hampshire born and bred. And then I had no desire to go into television whatsoever, which I'm sure we'll touch on. I went to Exeter University and read politics, which has been absolutely no use to me whatsoever.
I just wanted to add in, actually, I think you'll find interesting this. I found out about your love of Southampton, and one of my cousins was a player for Southampton.
No way. By the name of?
Ryan Bertrand.
No way. He's actually a very clever businessman, as well as being a great left back for us.
Yep, he's on my mum's side. He's my cousin. I very rarely saw him. He's a very busy man with everything that he's doing now, and especially when he was playing. But yeah, it's my one little claim to fame, especially being a Chelsea fan myself. It was
he's a hell of a player, honestly, a hell of a player, and a very impressive character as well. I remember interviewing him a couple of times. So I used to host the end of season awards, and he was very switch on, Ryan. He'd always have a plan, and he's doing brilliantly outside of football, which was always going to happen with him.
Definitely, especially because his family unit around him's amazing. His brother's very involved as well.
We need him at the minute. I wish he'd make a comeback.
I must admit, it's a shame. I loved when Ryan was at Southampton. They were going for a real push, and I really enjoyed watching him play. But coming back to your story, I would imagine then you never really got to settle as a child growing up, and particularly like that must have made you so good at adapting to situations, as particularly in social situations. And I would imagine that's probably had quite a big knock-on effect in your career going forward
Yeah.
because you're so used to adapting.
Yeah, maybe. Also, you get to see so many interesting things in so many interesting countries and so many interesting cultures. You really have your eyes opened at a young age, I think. And I really enjoyed those experiences. The downside, if I'm being brutally honest with you, is when we got sent to Germany again. I think I did probably 3 spells in Germany. And I think our 5th or 6th posting there tipped my dad over the edge. And he left the army after that. No offense to Germany, all your German listeners. I enjoyed it at the same time.
Germany's an amazing place, but I can imagine
army bases aren't the greatest.
Yes, yeah, definitely. It probably doesn't expose you to the other bits of the country because I'd imagine you're very much in and around the barracks.
Correct. Except one posting we had in Cologne, actually, where we were more involved in the city and we could go and watch Cologne play football, and Cologne's a great, great city. So that was fun.
Where was your favourite place that you...
Hong Kong, without hesitation. I can't remember that much about it because I'd have only been maybe 6 or 7 years old, but I know I had a great time there.
I would imagine the culture would have been amazing because it would have been so different to what we're used to.
Yeah. Real, again, at that age, a real eye-opener. My mum worked in the library. I remember that bit. We had a gold car, would you believe, that once had a snake in it. I can remember, when you're 6 or 7, you just have these hazy little memories. I'd love to go back there now because obviously horse racing is such a big thing in Hong Kong. I'd love to experience Happy Valley and Sha Tin, which I've never done.
I mean, it's such a different part of the world and such a different way of working. And I didn't even think about that. You're right. They have a huge love for racing.
Oh, it's mad over there. Absolutely mad over there. They're absolutely infatuated by it. You should see the betting turnover in Hong Kong. It's unbelievable. It's off the scale.
I wouldn't have even thought Hong Kong would have been a place that would have been into
it. Massive.
There you go. You learn something new every day. What actually, so obviously we've spoken a little about growing up, but what led you to, because I understand that your journey in was mostly through journalism, but you mentioned briefly there that you studied politics.
Journalism came around, to be honest, as a bit of an accident. And I know a lot of young people will listen to this and hopefully there's some lessons from it and we'll come to them again a bit later. But I had no set path. I had no absolute career path ahead of me. So what happened was I went and read politics at university at Exeter, which I loved. I went racing on a regular basis at Exeter, occasionally at Taunton, occasionally Newton Abbot, always Wincanton on a Thursday. Absolutely loved it. Didn't do much politics, but I just wanted to show I had a good brain, and then I wanted to get into sport. Yeah. And I got a good degree. I was very happy with my 2-1 in politics. And I then started applying to places, and I got accepted on what is now the BHA. In those days, it was the British Horse Racing Board. The BHB had a graduate scheme. I think there were 12 of us on the course, and I got a place. So I almost cut short my university career. I never graduated officially because I was straight onto this course in Newmarket. So I did 2 weeks learning in Newmarket, and then you got sent on a placement, just as a lot of kids do. And I applied. I decided, I don't know why, I wanted to work at a race course. So I applied to 3 different race courses. Remember, there was only 12 of us on the course, so my chances were good. I applied to Ascot, I think, Goodwood, and what was called in those days United Racecourses. This is in the 90s, the mid-90s. United Racecourses was Sandown, Kempton and Epsom. I thought, right, I'll take any of those. The letter comes through the post. It says, congratulations, you're on this graduate scheme, la-di-da-di-da. You're going on your placement to Ladbrokes, the bookmakers. And... I was thinking, where the hell am I going to head up here? And my dad said to me, go and do your 10 days, whatever it was, and then you can go and get a proper job. Yeah. And I remember it so well. My mum took me, I remember it now, to High Street Kensington, bought my first suit. And I went into Ladbrokes, Rayners Lane. No one wore a suit. No one wore a suit. I was the joker. I was ridiculed. And I thought, I'm not going to survive this. It was a real life experience for me. I learnt a lot there. And rather than staying for 10 days, I stayed for 3.5 years. So my initial taste of racing and working life was actually as a bookmaker, working for Ladbrokes, where I climbed the ladder quite nicely, quite quickly over my 3 and a bit years there.
What a turn of events. You wouldn't have thought that would have been your journey through to where you're...
Well, I didn't want it to be either, don't forget. I mean, it wasn't by design.
But then I think that's the perfect example of always saying yes and just taking opportunities as they come, because you never know where it's going to lead you. Absolutely
right. And once you get in there, that's when you start to adapt and make the most of it. I got in there and my eyes were like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I said yes to everything, threw myself into everything, and learned so quickly. And I quickly became an odds compiler, would you believe? I did a bit of time in the shop. I did a bit of time in a Ladbroke shop on North End Road, which was pretty scary, actually. But then I learned about odds compiling, how you make the odds for different events. So I became a horse racing odds compiler. I ran the cricket department on my own, age whatever I was, 22. So I learned pretty quickly.
Can you give us a brief summary of what an odds compiler, like how that, what would that look like?
So you make the odds. So when you go into a betting shop, or you look online these days, if you go onto Ladbrokes' website or any other bookmaker, you'll see odds.
Yep.
So say, let's talk about the odds for Strictly Come Dancing. Who was going to win Strictly Come Dancing?
Yep.
You'd have, say there were 12 runners. You'd price up those 12 runners and you'd bet to a certain percentage, because every price or odds is equivalent to a percentage.
Yep.
So 4-1, for example, I can still remember it now. 4-1 is 20%. So you've used 20% of your book at 4-1. Yep. So if you then go from there and you price everyone else up, and then you have to adjust it to make your book. So if it was 12 runners, you'd bet to 125%, for example, which means if everyone put the same amount of money on each of the dancers, you'd make 25% profit.
Yep.
But obviously it doesn't work like that, because different money goes on different people. So you'd adjust your odds. So each price and its percentage added up to 125. So you did a lot of tinkering, and eventually there you'd have your book, and you would send it off to the shops and to the newspapers, and those would be the Ladbrokes prices.
Wow, I'm just naive and I just didn't even think about how those odds came to be. I just thought it was.
So next time you're at Lingfield and you look at a bookmaker's odds on the board, you'll see all those prices will add up to a certain percentage. It's called the overround. And if a loads of money comes for one horse at 3-1, he'll shorten it up to 5-2, and that's taken out a certain percentage. So he'll have to lengthen another horse's odds, and that's how bookmaking works. I've tried to. I hope that's simplified.
That makes. So I'd say I just didn't even look at or think about the logistics of. I just kind of had that naive opinion, of that one's the one that's the favourite and the people reckon's going to win, and that was how it was generated. I didn't even think about the background of it.
Well, you sort of start with your favourite. So you start with your favourite, and you think in your head, right, this is an even money chance. And if it is an even money chance, that's 50% of your book gone. So you're going to have to go big price about a lot of the others to keep yourself within that 125%. You'd only have 75% for the other runners in a 12-runner race, for example. But the reason I got into journalism, coming back to what you're saying, is because I made an almighty cock-up. In 1999 it was. I was in charge of the cricket, and the Cricket World Cup was over here. Yep. Then you wouldn't even have been born.
I would have been a couple months old.
And I was all in on Pakistan, right? I wanted to duck Pakistan for the World Cup. I thought they were different class. They had Shoaib Akhtar and all these brilliant cricketers. Yep. And they played a group game against Bangladesh, I think it was. And I thought they're going to absolutely steamroll them. And I went biggest odds on Bangladesh. And it was an infamous game that Pakistan lost in mysterious circumstances. And I got absolutely cleaned out. And that pretty much prompted the end of my bookmaking career. And my eyes were turned to journalism, because there was a betting magazine starting up called Sports Advisor magazine, who came and headhunted me. And I then said, yes, please. I'll go into this startup, which was really exciting. And I became a journalist overnight, basically.
That's crazy. Because what was your experience of a startup like? Because I didn't have an overall positive experience when I've worked in startups before. What was your journey like? Obviously, it led you to where you are.
For a couple of years, it was sensational. I loved it. You have equity in the company, and we flew along. I became the editor of the magazine, would you believe, quite quickly. So there was only a handful of us. And it looked for a while as if we were going to absolutely make it. Yep. And anyone who'll remember this, when was it? 2001, a lot of companies like ours, Sports Advisor, were worth a lot of money on paper. Then came the dot-com crash. Yep. You won't remember this because you were 2. And overnight, we became almost worthless.
Okay.
So I was eyeing up houses in London and all sorts. And literally overnight, with the dot-com crash, it was called, that disappeared. And we were in deep, deep trouble. Deep, deep trouble. So was the country, really. But startups like ours were in deep trouble. And again, that's where the career took another turn. Because, do you want me to explain what happened?
Go.
TV's coming next, Charlie. TV's coming next. Because it was a betting magazine called Sports Advisor, and our audience were punters, and particularly spread betting punters in the city, Sporting Index, IG Index, SpreadX, all these guys. And I used to go on TV, Bloomberg TV, in the city of London, Liverpool Street. Used to go every Friday morning, and I'd do these shows in Liverpool Street, a guy called Richard Jordan, lovely man who presented it. And we talk sport, the weekend sport. We'd record probably 2 or 3 shows to go out over the weekends on Bloomberg TV, a financial TV channel where sport was pretty irrelevant, to be honest with you, but a bit of light-hearted chat about the sport. And this just shows you where you get a bit of luck, because there wouldn't have been many people watching the sport. I think it was called Spread Your Bets or something the show was called. But the deputy head of Sky Sports, a guy called Andy Melvin, was watching Bloomberg TV in his hotel in the middle of wherever he was, the Far East somewhere, saw this kid and thought, wow, he's got something about him. It's all subjective, this could have been anybody. I mean, other people probably thought I was absolutely useless, but he liked something about me. I've no idea why, and got me into Sky Sports.
That's great. As I say, that just feeds back to what I said earlier of just taking the chances when they come. You never know what.
Yeah, you need a little bit of luck as well. I've had a lot of luck, but it's also about taking advantage of that luck. You're absolutely right.
Wow. So how did you go from, obviously you went into Sky Sports, how did you climb the ladder of Sky?
I was useless. I was absolutely hopeless to start with. I remember him, the same guy, he was quite a feisty Scotsman. And I went in initially and they gave me a go reading Autocue and the news. And I then went to his office and he said, "You were hopeless." And I'm like, "Oh, thanks, great." He said, "But you've got something, we're going to give it a whirl." So I started on a show called 90 Minutes, I think it was called. And they dressed me as like a city trader. I had braces on and my tie halfway down my front, and I do the odds and the Opta stats on a show called 90 Minutes with Kirsty Gallagher and Matt Lorenzo, and talking about the weekend's football. And my career didn't get off to a great start because Kirsty then left that show, and our viewers left with her. That show got culled. Then I did another show. Though I did the Full SP, a betting show with Jeff Stelling of all people, and even that didn't work. So at that point, every show I was doing, and my magazine had gone under, so I was now focused on a career in TV, was going to ruin. They kept dying, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm the Grim Reaper of television. This is never going to work. And then a man who I owe an awful lot to, Andy Cairns, who was the chief editor of Sky Sports News, said, "We'll give you a whirl on Sky Sports News." And again, I was disastrous to start with because I didn't know how to read Autocue. I was just winging it to camera. And he sat me down and said, "Right, read this Autocue and let's see what you like." And I was terrible. So again, I go up to his office and I have that demoralizing moment. He says, "You were useless." And I'm thinking, just give me a chance. I'll learn, I'll learn. So I sat and taught myself how to read Autocue, which anyone can do. It's just practice. And lo and behold, I suddenly became a sports news reader.
I mean, that also leads into something I say all the time of especially because I've mentioned at the beginning, we talk a lot about disability. And one of the big things that come with that is allowing people to make mistakes. And it was clear from the story you've just told me, the two big people that helped you on that journey allowed you to make the mistakes and allowed you to learn. We emphasize getting things perfect too much nowadays.
But I was a determined sod as well, I can assure you. I was committed. I was like, come on, give me a chance here. I'll teach myself how to do it. I'll get back to you in whatever it was, 6 weeks' time. And of course, I just relentlessly went at it and taught myself to do it. And yeah, bit of determination.
I suppose as well, as we mentioned before, being a massive Southampton fan, I can imagine there was the drive of loving football anyway. So it's in a field that was your space.
I couldn't believe I got in at Sky. I was mad about sport. And the carrot was dangled. The opportunity was there and I wasn't going to give it up. And then one Sunday night in, crikey, I think it was probably 2003, it was a Sunday evening with Mike Wedderburn, who's still going now. This is 22 years ago. On one Sunday night, they let me go on Sky Sports News, 6 o'clock till midnight with Mike Wedderburn and Ed Chamberlin. I was off.
What was your biggest highlight at your time at Sky Sports?
On Sky Sports News, or because then obviously might get the big job eventually.
Yeah, so let's go.
Just Sky Sports News.
Let's go with Sky Sports News first.
Because then the big job's coming. Yeah. That's a real twist to the story coming. Sky Sports News, crikey, there were so many big moments. The sale Chelsea to Abramovich. I remember the Dimitar Berbatov. I used to do transfer deadline day with Jim White, seeing Dimitar Berbatov even in the corridor at Old Trafford. And that was the moment where you knew he was signing for United. Jose Mourinho coming to Chelsea, breaking that news. There were so many moments. So many moments.
The worst thing is you're listing off so many big moments in my early childhood, particularly the Jose Mourinho one bit.
Yeah, I think the moment for me where I think they thought I was all right because I was doing basically the graveyard shifts, 10 to midnight. And then that would be, you'd go on a loop through the night. I think people thought I presented from midnight through to 6 o'clock in the morning, but you'd record that last hour, used to go out on a loop. But I went out probably in 2005, 2006, I can't remember when it was, but I was the reporter who went to Zurich when the 2 World Cups were allocated to Qatar and Russia. And England thought they would get that one that was in Qatar in 2018. Was it 2018?
When was Qatar?
Whenever it was.
That's gonna bug me. I'll put it here.
No, it'd be Russia, the other way around. So Russia came before Qatar. So Qatar would have been a couple of years ago, 2022. And England thought they'd get that first one. And we got 2 votes, one of which was our own, Jeff Thompson, who was the FA representative. And I was outside this convention centre on a 24-hour news channel. And they basically said, this is a massive story, Ed, we're staying with you. And I had the whole of European TV surrounded my little pen where I was just going at it. And they wanted to stick with me as much as they could. And I'd interviewed Boris Johnson, David Dean, and everyone was listening because I was leading the news agenda there. And I remember American TV channels were messaging Sky saying that kid outside the convention centre in Zurich was all right. You know, what a story I had on my hands because England had been humiliated. Putin and Russia had got the World Cup. The Australians had been humiliated. They thought they were going to get 2022 and that was given to Qatar. Plus you had all sorts of theories as to why FIFA were doing what they were doing. It was Sepp Blatter at the time. And I got my teeth right into it. And I was broadcasting, pretty much all hour and going again at the top of the hour. And I was in my element. And I think that felt like a bit of a breakthrough for me because from that I started doing midweek soccer specials off the back of that. So Jeff Stelling would do the Saturday. I'd do the Tuesday and Wednesday with all those scores coming in and everything happening in your earpiece. And that would be the most complicated television I've ever presented in my life. Jeff Stelling is a genius, absolute genius. My great mate Simon Thomas is doing it now and doing a great job.
So what was next on the journey? So obviously you've had that high of working on the World Cup story. What was?
But then I'm doing the midweek soccer specials and making it. Sky, you wanted to get into football. Yep. I presented rugby. I'd done all sorts of other things. I'd done cross country running. I'd tried my hand at everything. But football is what makes Sky Sports tick. It does now, 10 years later, or however long it is. Football is everything. And I knew my business head was saying I need to be in football. So getting the midweek soccer specials was great. And I was flying. And you might want to come back to it later, but then I had the devastating news that I was very ill. And I missed nearly a year at that point. But then I come back in August of 2010, it must have been. And my hair's come back and I'm just finding my feet when a big scandal erupts in football with Richard Keys and Andy Gray, the iconic presenters at Sky for 20 years, got caught up in that sexism scandal that was all over the papers. Andy Gray got sacked, Richard Keys resigned, and arguably the biggest job in football was up for grabs. And Gary Lineker was the hot favourite to get it. And then they put 3 presenters on trial, Ben Shepherd, David Jones and myself, and the newspapers were calling it presenter idol. I was the 14-1 outsider, for what it's worth. I was 14-1 with Paddy Power. And my first couple of games on trial, never presented live football before, were a disaster. The first one was Fulham Newcastle, which didn't go well. Then I did the North East Derby, which went even worse. I screwed that one up royally, but that's a whole other story. But my third game was the Manchester Derby. Do you remember the Rooney overhead kick game? Yeah. And that was the making of me. And because I managed to have this row in the studio with Mike Summerby, the old Man City player. And the Sky bosses liked it, obviously, and the newspapers liked it. My confidence was boosted and my game started getting better. And then I was called into the boss's office in that February, must have been. And I was told, we've got good news for you and bad news for you. And I said, right, let's start with the good news. And he says, you're the new face of Super Sunday and Monday Night Football. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like a dream come true. I cannot believe it. And I said, just what's the bad news? And he goes, you're going to be working with a guy called Gary Neville. And at the time I thought, oh no, the most unpopular footballer in Premier League history, who I'd actually done a game with at Blackburn one day and we hadn't got on very well. So I was thinking, oh no, this is just not going to work, was my initial thoughts. But turned out all right in the end.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, Gary Neville's everywhere at the moment.
Gary Neville's busy, but he's also a genius.
Very true. I mean, I don't even know how I'd react to being given that job.
I was excited. Listen, I was excited. I was intimidated by it. You know, the previous incumbents, Keys and Gray, had been legends of the game. You know, I was going to be presenting Monday Night Football. That was the iconic football show, and I was going to be doing it with a guy who'd never worked in television before, Gary Neville. And we spent that summer getting to know each other, and I was learning from him. And, we had a touch screen brought into the studio. He had a touch screen at home. Touchscreens were state of the art then. And his attitude was, right, if I'm going to do this TV thing, I'm going to do it properly. Just like he'd done with his football career, where he wasn't the most talented footballer in the world by any means. He's actually a better cricketer than he was a footballer. But he got every last drop of ability out of himself. And there we were, pitched in together, Man City, Swansea, on a Monday night in August, the start of that season. What would that have been? 2011, 2012, I suppose? Was it 2010, 2011? I can't remember. Anyway, that went really badly wrong. And we trended globally on social media. And, were ridiculed, and that wasn't a good thing. It was that interview Gary did with Roberto Mancini. Hi, Roberto. But we improved quickly, I think it's fair to say, and we flew along. Well, Gary flew along, and I just followed him.
As I say, I would have, as a football fan myself, I would have struggled to. I think I would have been over-analysing everything I was doing.
Presenting Southampton games was the worst. When you're presenting your own team, I was so excited about them coming up, and every Southampton game I did, they got beat. The first game was away at Man City. Did we lead? We were certainly 2-2, and they won that. Then a week or so later, at St Mary's, Southampton, Man United, we definitely led that game. Then Van Persie got a hat-trick, and we lost that 3-2 as well. And I'm thinking, this is horrendous. And it took over 2 years for me to present a Southampton win. Jose Font and all these guys called me the curse. But then one day at Old Trafford, Dusan Tadic scored in a 1-0 win, and the monkey was off my back. And my life changed that day. But honestly, presenting your own team is hell, absolute hell. I thought I was going to love it, and I absolutely hated it.
That's it's always as well the pressure that comes with that as well, because you want to do well, but as I say, you just fumble your words. Is what I
didn't fumble my words necessarily. When we kept losing, I was just so downbeat. I'd look at the clock, and we're on air for another hour and a half, and I've got to keep smiling and try and stay neutral. And it's just I just found it really hard, because at the end of the day, I was just a fan.
How do you actually? I've never thought to ask that. How do you manage being neutral? I mean, everyone goes into professional mode, but being neutral if you're a big fan is quite challenging at times.
It's really hard. It's really hard, because as a fan, you're hurting most of the time. When you do win, you're so elated. But you just try it. I think I'm quite calm.
Yeah.
The first game we ever did at Man City, the studio was at the other end that it is now. The same studio that I presented Aguero when, the famous Aguero goal. And when Southampton scored that day, I think it was Ricky Lambert who scored, I can't quite remember. But most of the Southampton fans turned. So you could see the bright lights in the studio. They knew I was there. And it looked a bit like the Poznan, because most of the Southampton fans turned and celebrated with me. And I just had to sit there, not move, and just with a little smile and my little wide smile on my face. Nothing more than that. I couldn't get up and give it some like I wanted to. I just smiled contently. But it was challenging.
It's also the adrenaline, because funny enough, I was watching an interview with Rio earlier today, and he was saying that he thinks that the atmosphere of football games has changed over the years. I sort of agree with it. I think the 2010s, there was just a tension. Whenever there was a game, there was big tension. I don't feel like it's there anymore, and I don't know why.
I don't know. I do think VAR doesn't help that either. That raw emotion of scoring a goal is now tempered.
And I feel like the rivalries have died a little bit. They're still...
Do you think?
Yeah.
See, I'm not in that role anymore, but it seems pretty intense to me.
I just think obviously we're seeing a big change happen at United, big change happen at Chelsea. I just feel like there's not you could cut the tension with a knife whenever we play each other. I just don't think it's the same. And it was interesting, because you were listing off the years that you covered it, and I'm like, those are some massive years, some big things happened.
Yeah. They'd be up there in the greatest things I've been lucky enough to do. Sir Alex Ferguson's last day at Old Trafford was incredible on the pitch. I treasure those photographs I've got. My God, I look young. And Aguero's goal to win that title was, honestly, I just still pinched myself that I was presenting that, with all the drama going on at the Stadium of Light and Man United thinking they'd won it. Gary Neville stood next to me going, something's happening. and then the 2 late goals at City, and oh my God, my notes just went out the window. I just went like that. This is unbelievable. All the notes that I'd done about Man United winning the title again suddenly were no use to me whatsoever, because Aguero's goal and that unbelievable commentary from Martin Tyler, it was What a moment. I'm so lucky to do that.
I think that Martin Tyler's celebration's engraved in most people's heads.
It was genuinely genius commentary. Any commentator anyone who wants to be a commentator, a little bit like being a presenter, is just look at the use of silence. You don't need to speak all the time. And, he gives it the Aguero, and then he pauses and you get Aguero with his shirt. And Tyler's saying nothing. And then he comes back in again at just the right moment. I swear you'll never see anything like this again. Watch it, drink it in. But it's the silence that's the best bit of it.
Yeah.
And the best presenters use silences to their advantage. Let the pictures do the talking for you a lot of the time.
It's also positioning your words and timing it.
Yeah, try.
And then I want to come on to where you are now and where you've moved to ITV Racing. Racing is a huge part of your life and a huge interest. So how was that journey going from one job in very much one space that's very important to you, very close to your heart, to then transitioning to racing as well? It just seems like you've just gone from strength to strength, to be honest.
I'm not sure many people agree with that for a couple of reasons, but I get asked. It's the question I get asked more than any other. If you and I went to the supermarket tomorrow afternoon, I guarantee you someone would say, "Why did you leave the Premier League for horse racing?" Because to 98% of people, it probably makes no sense at all. I had such an unbelievable job, and I did love it. I absolutely loved it. Why did I leave? I just wanted to do something different, to be honest. I had an unbelievable journey. Don't forget, we brought Jamie Carragher on Monday Night Football, which was an incredible period of time. I mean, I learned so much off those two guys. I love working with them. But Gary had left. So it was just Cara and I at the time. And an era had come to an end. Gary had gone to Valencia, which went horribly wrong, of course. Yep. And then England, which didn't go particularly well either. But so that era had come to an end. The sort of Neville and Chamberlain era had come to an end. I'd loved every second of it, but I was ready for a new challenge. And ITV approached me in January of 2016. I remember it well. And I thought, crikey, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this because of my contract with Sky. But that's a whole other podcast, how that all played out. But eventually I left. Yeah, Leicester won the league. And my final game was Man United Bournemouth at United. And I said goodbye to everybody. It was quickly in the papers and what have you. And there was a blooming bomb scare. I had to present from the car park and then go back and do it again on the Tuesday, having said goodbye to everybody. I'm off to ITV, So that was a bit difficult. But then it was all about ITV and racing. And I mean, how lucky am I to do it? It's where I started out in racing. I'm as passionate about football as I am about racing, to be honest. But I love what I do. I love working for ITV, and it was an opportunity I couldn't turn down.
It's also, it's just this, the biggest thing that stood out to me when reading your story was just that it's like, it's two massive moments, and it's amazing that you've managed to achieve both. And I think it's just, I don't know, I think as someone looking on, I just sit there going, to have those two massive moments. Now, I don't doubt that there's been moments where you think this sucks and I really don't want to, this isn't me. And there's
not really. Sometimes when the weather's bad, but not really. No, I always feel very fortunate to do what I do.
But it's just, I'd say, I just love that in your story, there's two major parts of it that just seem like it would be knowing what I know from reading about you is two big passions, and it just shows like you can do it. And I just love that part of your story. I think really stuck out.
No, you're very kind to say so. I've been very fortunate, really, as well.
Where does the love of racing come from? Does that come from your time at Ladbrokes? Was that where it?
No, before then. I grew up with it, really. My grandfather on my mum's side, who used to live in Somerset in Bruton, actually, before Bruton was trendy. Different place these days. And he was mad about his racing. Yeah. He loved two things, really, drinking cider, and he loved a bet. And I used to do his ITV7 with him because he wasn't the most mobile then. He'd be in his big armchair watching the racing. And I'd sit devotedly with him and so it was drip feeding there. Yeah. And then 1981 was an unbelievable year. So every year I would do the sort of Grand National sweepstake. I'd only be 7. And I think then he said, right, I'll put a quid each way on a horse for you. And I remember putting on a horse called Spartan Missile, who was second in the Grand National. And Aldeniti won it. And I totally, as a 7-year-old, missed the story of the winning jockey having recovered from cancer and just the most amazing sporting story. So that was incredible. And then a few months later, really, in June, Shergar won the Derby. So I was captivated by both. And from then onwards, from that year, 1981, which is the most formative year in terms of racing, I was hooked, completely hooked. So, and then it was betting. It was the betting side of it, really, rather than, I'm not horsey and I don't ride. It was the betting side of it that fascinated me. And of course, I then ended up at Ladbrokes, which
reinforced it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very well put. Yeah.
What about, where do you see racing going in the next few years? Because obviously there's been a bit of controversy, is the wrong word, but there's been a lot of talk about the Grand National and the impact it has from an ethical standpoint. Where do you see racing going in the next few years? How do you see it changing?
Racing, like so many other sports, it's got its problems. It's got its problems, and the main problem for racing at the minute is financial. With government intervention, gambling is the main source of income for racing. So when you have a bet, effectively the bookmaker ends up paying into what's called the levy, and the levy is then distributed amongst racing. And our biggest challenge at the moment is a thing called affordability checks, which are a bit random, but you could go to have a bet tomorrow and they'll say, no, you're going to have to show your accounts, mortgage, all these kind of different papers and proof, and people are getting fed up with it, and betting turnover is dropping, and that is really worrying for the sport, And listen, I'm all in favour of helping problem gamblers. We've got to do that. But the way the government's going about it at the minute is making that problem even worse. And so the finances of the sport are its biggest challenge moving forward. From a personal point of view, I hope that racing stays on terrestrial television, whether that's us, obviously, ideally, because I'd love to keep doing what I'm doing, but it needs to stay on us or BBC or Channel 4, because racing needs eyeballs. Without eyeballs, racing will disappear. Like show jumping's disappeared when it went to satellite, and racing can't afford to do that. So listen, it's a very uncertain future at the minute. There's some real challenges, but it's a magnificent sport at the same time. And I think over the years, I've been following racing for 40 odd years, and there's always a crisis on, and yet racing seems to carry on. So I'm hopeful that we'll be all right.
I think it's also the adrenaline that comes to it. And I think from my age group, it seems that there's a group that will always go. There's a group in my age group that will always go, but then there's also groups that have never even heard of racing. Prime example is my partner. Till she met my family, she'd never heard of racing, never heard of placing a bet, never heard of anything. Now it's one of her favourite things to do is to go.
Really? Would she enjoy an afternoon at Lingfield, for example? I know.
Yeah, she loves it. So much so that the company she works for sponsored a horse, and she got invited down and loved it, and then she became the go-to for the bets because all of her bets were coming in.
Fantastic. It is. Listen, it is a great day out. Great day out. Wherever you go, which are good ones for you in terms of accessibility and getting it around?
I'd say Lingfield's one of my favourites because you also get a very good view. And I'm yet to travel further out, so I do. I can't remember what the other one we went to. Where do we go? Windsor. We went to Windsor Racecourse, but it didn't do it. Access was perfect, but I think the viewing point where we could get to wasn't as good as what you get at Lingfield.
A good view doesn't exist at Windsor. Great racecourse, but they run straight at you. So
yeah,
I don't think anyone's view's great at Windsor.
So it's one of those things. But I think I always say to friends, I said it's just a great day out. It's the fun of
well done. Keep banging that drum.
Yeah,
for me.
It's just I don't know. Everyone's like, oh, but it's betting. And I'm like, you only bet. Like one of the best pieces of advice my dad goes to me is bet with the money that you're comfortable losing. If you lose it, you've had a great day and you've paid X amount of money for that great day. If you come home with some, great, happy days. And that's
a great way. Gambling responsibly, it's a bit of fun. Yeah. Absolutely right.
And I think as well, like I say, it's bringing it as well to the younger generation, because I think there are a group that aren't aware of it and don't know the fun that comes with it. As I say, my partner's a prime example, and I think that's what we need to do is show that you can have a lot of fun, particularly with racing. Also, the other thing as well is being someone who's ridden before, the beauty of some of the horses is crazy, and I think there's something to be said about that. But I think the atmosphere of race days, I love it.
You should be marketing our sport. You're great. Love it. But there's so many elements to it. If you go to the races, some people enjoy the dressing up, and the social side of it, and having a drink. Some people like the betting. Some people just love the horses. Some people just love the music that happens afterwards. There's so many elements to a race day. There's something. I think the best race days is when there's something for everyone.
100%. And I completely agree. Probably one of my favourites is the dressing up part of it, because I think like it's a bit of a lost art. We don't do it as much, and it's part of the fun, and it's making a day of it. And I think that's the big thing with racing. Like you say, there's something for everyone, and make a day of it, and it's a good day out. On that note, what do you have a favourite event when it comes to racing, in terms of like the major racing of like the Grand National, Cheltenham, Ascot?
This is such an impossible one to answer. Every week in my job, what I love about this job is every week is completely different. I love going to the smaller tracks. This weekend I should have been going to Warwick, but sadly it's been called off. I love going to the Wincantons and Weatherby's and these different places, and we try and show and showcase these smaller courses on ITV. But listen, it's the big ones that probably stand out and get your adrenaline going. I love Royal Ascot's such a buzz. Glorious Goodwood's a great fun week. York is spectacular. If you haven't been to York, that's such a beautiful racecourse. But jumping's probably where my heart really is, despite having to stand out in the cold weather. So again, there are just so many. But Cheltenham Festival. But I suppose the biggest day I do in terms of viewing figures, the biggest football match I'd ever present would be Man United Liverpool, or Liverpool Man United, and that would get 2.5, maybe 3 million tops, something like that. And the Grand National I'm presenting to 7-8 million people and hundreds of millions of people around the world. And if that doesn't get your heart going when you're told 30 seconds till you're on air on Grand National Day. And I grew up, as you can tell, the Grand National was my passion growing up. And that grandfather I talked to you about, Jockey was called, Bapper I called him. I mean, he's been gone a very long time, but to think that I presented a Grand National, I mean, I'd like to think he'd be pretty proud of that, because I pinch myself when I'm stood up there on Grand National Day, because, you know, the legends of presenting have done that. You know, Des Lynam being the doyen of them all. I
mean, the adrenaline rush that comes with the National as well. Because I feel like that's the day where, particularly people who don't do racing the rest of the year, it's one of the days that everyone gets involved with the Grand National. Yeah,
it's very, very special. And Liverpool are so proud of it. You know, I used to go and do the football at Goodison and Anfield, and they wouldn't give me the time of day. I go and present the Grand National, which it's their event, it's Liverpool's event. They're so proud of it. You know, it's hard to buy yourself a drink. They just love it. And all of a sudden I'm quite popular there, which is nice.
Just don't tell them you're a Southampton fan.
You are, don't they mind, to be honest, we're so bad.
What is the most common misconception when it comes to racing? Obviously, we've spoken as well about the ethics of racing a little bit, and like the struggles that racing's going through at the moment. But what's one of the things that people often misconstrued about racing?
You touched on one of them, I suppose. It's not just gambling. Gambling's a huge part of the sport. It's intrinsically linked, but there's a lot more fun to be had than just gambling. I think the misconception that I'd like to change, I suppose, is that lovers of racing, sometimes people think they don't love the actual horses.
Yeah.
We love the horses. You know, when the one thing we've got in common with anyone who doesn't like the sport, you know, we had protesters at Aintree and we had protesters at Epsom. What they've got to realise, the one thing we've got in common with them is we absolutely love and respect these animals. These animals, at the end of the day, they are bred to run, they're bred to jump. It's our responsibility to do everything we can to make it as safe as we possibly can. But listen, in racing, there's always going to be a risk. It is dangerous. That is the sport. You can't take the risk out of it completely. And it's especially dangerous because these are animals who weigh half a ton and they're running around on these spindly little legs. That's the nature of a horse, the nature of a thoroughbred. They are a magnificent animal, the thoroughbred. You've mentioned it. When you go to the races, you see these horses. They are just stunning. They have an amazing life. Trust me, they have the most amazing life. They enrich people's lives. They provide employment. They're wonderful for people with therapy. The magic of the horse. And the simple fact is, if there wasn't horse racing, the thoroughbred, these horses wouldn't exist. So that's probably the one misconception I'd want to change. We absolutely love these horses.
I think it's completely right. Like, whenever I think of any of my friends, colleagues, people I've met that are into their horses, all of them love the animals dearly. They're up at God knows what hour, sort of amount and everything else. And I think the same goes, especially from a professional capacity. if it's in a professional standpoint, that love's going to be there even more. And it's so hard because I understand the argument of the horse doesn't get a say in it. But then I also, as you say, any sport comes with risks, and it's just how you manage those risks. And as you say, it brings so much employment to people. It brings so much joy to people. I think
it brings joy to the horses. It brings joy to them as well. There's no two ways about it.
Especially because the amount of, imagine the amount of freedom. And it's like anyone, if any human, if you do something every day, you develop a love for it. And I'd imagine it's the same for the horses. And I think if you didn't race them, they'd be like, well, what do we do now?
Yeah, well, you couldn't do anything with a thoroughbred. And listen, if there wasn't racing, they wouldn't exist anyway. So it's not much of an argument. These horses are bred to work as they do. It's
as I say, it's something that I really want to see more people get involved with to develop an understanding of it. Because I think as well, people don't look far enough in, because they see, like I say, they associate racing with betting, and then betting itself can be quite confusing. And I think that's what puts people off getting involved in the sport and getting involved with racing as a whole, because it's a great day out, but it's got so many amazing parts of it as well.
I totally agree. Well said.
I want to come back a little bit to a point I mentioned earlier about about your presenting career. And obviously I mentioned quite gushingly about you holding 2 very high level presenting jobs. And a lot of young people, myself included, when I was in school, wanted to get into presenting. What advice would you give as someone that's held such a high position in presenting?
I think the first thing you need to do at school and college, university, wherever you are, show you've got a good brain. Doesn't matter what you're studying. You don't have to do media studies. You don't necessarily have to do a degree that's going to lead into journalism. Show you've got a good brain. But all the time while you're doing that, have an eye on what you want to do. Now, if you want to get a job in presenting in television, journalism is going to hold the key to that. So when you're at school, get involved in magazines, podcasts, all these different things. When you're at university, get involved in the local newspaper, all these kind of things. Get them onto your CV. And I think if you learn one thing from me is you do need a little bit of luck. Of course, you need a little bit of luck. But if you do get that luck and a door opens for you, go charging through it and make the most of it. Because if it doesn't work out, don't leave with any regrets. And, Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville were 2 of my inspirations for that. And I learned from them what hard work does and where hard work gets you. They're 2 people. Again, Carra wasn't a particularly talented individual as a footballer, but my God, he wore his heart on his sleeve. He got found out at international level because he wasn't that brilliant on the ball, but he got every last bit of ability out of himself. And those 2 have been a real inspiration to me, and I've learned so much from them. And they've told me, or taught me even, that hard work, determination can get you a very long way. And for me, that hard work and that determination has made me live a dream, really. I'm very fortunate to do what I'm doing, but if you've got a dream, go for it. But you're not going to get there automatically. It's going to take a little bit of luck and a lot of hard work and determination.
Who would you say, on that note of, like, you briefly mentioned Carragher there and Neville, who do you think in your career had the biggest impact and influence?
Crikey, I mentioned Andy Cairns earlier, who gave me my break in television, really, with Sky Sports News, because it wasn't going very well before then. So I owe an awful lot to him. He got the ball rolling, and I learned a lot from him as well, because he was a brilliant journalist. And he put a big store in journalism, and I learned a lot. I was a journalist before that, but that was for a betting magazine, really. And I learned all about the story, and it lives with me now, always asking myself, what's the story? In any broadcast you do, and I do a lot of media training, you say to yourself, what's the story? What tone do I set today? And what's my audience? And that's sort of where you gear the way you present around. So I learned a lot from him. And then the football boys I learned a lot from. And Des Lynam was my hero and my inspiration as a presenter. But more recently, my bosses at ITV, really, Mark DeMuth and Niall Sloan, took a big risk on a football presenter who wasn't a world beater by any means, who flew on the tails of Gary Neville and then Nev and Carragher. And they gave me this opportunity, and they took a massive risk. I took a risk as well, don't get me wrong, moving from football into racing. But they put their faith and trust in me, and my God, I've enjoyed it. I've learned so much from them to very important people in my life, and they're still my bosses now. So I owe them an awful lot, and they've been a huge part of my life and an inspiration for me, really.
It's also, I think the whole thing you've highlighted there as well is you can't get anywhere on your own. And I think that's something that people also...
Yeah, and listen, family's very important like that as well.
Yeah.
Support. Don't forget, I work... there are 52 Saturdays in the year. I would work a huge number of them. 40-something of those weekends. And that's time when I should be watching. I've got 2 kids. I should be watching them do things. I should be at plays, musicals. And sometimes I'm not. Particularly on a Friday evening, whatever it might be, because, when sport happens. So... you need a lot of support like that, because a lot of sacrifices have to be made in this industry. When you work in sport, you're going to have to work at antisocial times. So support of the family is just as important as support of your colleagues. How do your children, what's their... how do they react to you being away so much? Because I think as well, there's a lot to be said about, oh no, you can't, you need to be there for the kids, and there's the big debate about careers. But then I think as well, it's you can't be in 2 places at once, and it's very tricky. And I think for me, I think it's about the kids understanding what the situation is to an extent as best they can, depending on their age. So then everyone's equipped with the information. But I think there's a big push at the moment to demonize people that work unsociable hours and everything. So I just wondered, how's that family dynamic worked, if you don't mind me asking? Yeah, you balance it really, because the upside to me being away, because I've tried to create this team ethic at ITV. So we meet up on a Friday evening and bond as a team before a show on a Saturday. And the downside of that is I'm away on a Friday evening and a Saturday daytime. The upside to it is, I'm around a lot in the week sometimes. Yeah. And I can do things that other parents can't. Yeah. And my daughter's now off traveling. She's 18. My son, who's 15, when I left football, I had to sit him down because I think he quite liked having a dad
in football,
who was the football league, the Premier League presenter. I think he quite liked that. And he's called Sam. And I said, Sam, there's something I need to tell you. I'm leaving Premier League football to go to present horse racing. And he said, Daddy, what have you done?
To be fair, I probably would have had the exact same reaction.
Yeah. Oh, he was devastated, absolutely devastated. But I think, I think they enjoy a day at the races now, a bit like you. So there's an upside to everything, and they get to go to lots of these meetings, and I think I hope they enjoy it.
I say I love that though, because it shows that your kids have very much been part of the story. As I say, as a football fan myself, I probably would have had the exact same reaction to you meeting up with Aguero.
And you like your race.
Yeah, to be fair, I would have been happy either way. As I say, going to all the different race courses, but I can appreciate the son's position of, but Dad's hanging around with Rooney. Why would you?
Yeah.
I want to come on to something you briefly mentioned earlier, and that is your journey with cancer and how that sort of impacted you. Obviously, you briefly touched on that it meant that you had to spend a bit of time out of your career for treatment and everything else. But what was that journey like, if you don't mind walking us through it?
Listen, looking back on it, and I don't talk about it that often, I feel very, very lucky. I'm proof that chemotherapy works and you can recover. There's not a big show I do. It's the big shows now, because this is, 10 years ago now. But still the big days, I think, oh, my word, I'm lucky to be here. I dodged a real bullet. I'm one of the lucky ones when so many other people, every family's touched by it, isn't it? Are so much less fortunate than me. So, listen, I had a pain in my stomach. I was presenting football. I was doing those midweek soccer specials. And my stomach would be agony, and I'd be taking Nurofen every few hours to get through a show. And I went to my local GP and said, I've got this really sore stomach, which I'm sure loads of other people said that day. And I was badly diagnosed to start with. I think they thought I just had, what do you take Rennie for? A bit of indigestion or something. And I started taking that, and then they thought I had mouth ulcers. And in fact, I had a freaking great tumor in my stomach, the size of an avocado. And I was in deep, deep trouble. And I ended up collapsing after a show I did. I was rushed to hospital. I had all the tests done. And then I was called in to Winchester Hospital. My wife and I went in, and I remember the nurse being in tears. And I thought, all right, this doesn't look good. And she said, I'm afraid to say you've got a tumor in your stomach. And the first question you ask is, how long have I got?
Yeah.
And it was bad. It was really bad. But I was rushed to Southampton Hospital. I was on chemotherapy. I had no idea what chemotherapy was. I was put on this drip and thought, what the hell is this? And that all happened very quickly. The doctors and nurses who looked after me were just unbelievable. I remember that first Saturday morning I woke up, and for the first time in weeks I was pain-free, because chemotherapy basically dissipates the tumour. And it was obviously pressing against all my organs and all this kind of stuff, which is why I was in so much pain. I was pain-free, but then chemotherapy hits you. There's millions of different types of chemotherapy, and mine was very severe. And on that first hospital stay, I had 9 weeks, I think, of really intense chemotherapy. My hair fell out pretty quickly, which is really hard for anybody. And I found that really hard. And I remember Steve Cottrell, it was, who came in. He was manager of Bristol, was he, at the time? He came in and shaved my head in front of the whole ward. And Dominic Cork used to come and see me from Hampshire and, try and keep spirits up. But it was hard. It was really, really hard. And then at the end of that, when I'd got through that bit, my blood markers, they call, start to improve. And that's when you realise it hasn't spread. And I realised I'd got a great chance of surviving this. And listen, I could go on about this for a long time, but I ended up having to have an operation to remove what was left of the tumour. And my whole stomach was infected from when they'd done the biopsy through my back. They'd clipped my bowel. I was in a world of trouble. So the hardest thing mentally was then thinking, right, I'm going to get back to work, and then being told you need an operation. Yeah. And that set me back another probably 3 months. My son was born. I couldn't lift him up and all these different things. But I got there in the end, and I'm so grateful to everyone who looked after me. My oncologist, a guy called Ben Mead, I owe my life to. And I was one of the fortunate ones. And, you'd be in a ward sometimes and you'd make a friend, and the next morning they wouldn't be there. And it was pretty harrowing stuff. So I felt, sounds silly to say it, but I felt very fortunate. And all you want when you're ill, all you want when you're on that journey is you just want to be normal again. You want people to stop staring at you when you're walking down the high street with no hair. You just want to be normal. You don't want sympathy. You just want to be normal. And doing normal things again and being normal now, I will never, ever take for granted.
And it's also led you to the amazing charity work you do. And I wanted to sort of briefly touch on that and get you to tell us a bit more about the work that you do.
Well Child came from that. I'm vice chairman of the Injured Jockeys Fund and do other bits and bats. But Well Child's a charity very close to my heart, because I said to myself, if I get out, every morning, basically, when you have chemotherapy, it does different things to different people, but it made me feel really sick. And I take an anti-sickness tablet each morning, and I challenge myself to get down. Anyone who knows Southampton Hospital will know there's a WH Smith's on the ground floor. And I had to get from the cancer ward. My challenge was to get to the WH Smith's and buy myself a racing post each morning. I couldn't do it every morning, but I challenged myself. And if I could do that, I just felt so good about myself. But to do that every morning, I had to go past this children's cancer ward, which you couldn't go in, obviously, but you could see the doors to it. And what was going on in there just broke my heart, really. The wards I was in were hard enough as it was, but to see a kids ward just tore me in pieces. I just couldn't believe it. And I said to myself, I'd love to raise money for a charity that gets kids treated at home rather than in a hospital. Yeah. And I found out about Well Child, which basically nurses seriously ill kids at home. All I wanted to do was be at home. I wanted to be, and I was 30 something. What was it like for a kid to be in hospital? Oh my God. So I got involved with Well Child, and I've just been on a journey with them. It's been amazing. I've had a golf day with them that's been going for 10 years. And through me, they've got to sponsor things like the Cheltenham Gold Cup. And now we've got this horse running called Sir Gino, and every time he wins, the owners are giving money to Well Child. And honestly, it makes me so emotional just thinking about it. And they're such an amazing charity. And those nurses do such an amazing job with these kids and the families, what they go through. Honestly, Well Child's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And I can't, it, as you say, it impacts everyone. So anything that we can do to raise awareness and support the treatment of it is so important. I mean, I've got family members that have been through it themselves, and it's, as you say, when you think of it being a kid, it's a completely different ballgame. I mean, I get asked on a regular basis, like, oh, if you could hand your disability back, would you ever do it? But it's very different, and the cancer journey is completely different. And I feel like a lot of the time they confuse the two. and there's always the sympathy that comes with it. But if you ask me who's been dealt the worst of the two cards, it's definitely the person suffering with cancer, because I'm really lucky in my situation that my condition doesn't get any worse. This is just me, and I've grown up like it, and I don't know any different. Whereas anyone going through cancer, they're constantly changing, and their abilities are changing, and everything else that comes with it. So
yeah, and dealing with the uncertainty of it and all that kind of stuff. But listen, your attitude's brilliant as well, so good for you.
I mean, as I say, it's so amazing how many people are impacted by it, and it's amazing how much work you've done to help fund it. And I didn't actually know that about Sir Gino, so I will be keeping an eye out for that horse whenever it's racing.
Yeah. So Marie Donnelly, bless her. During COVID, I got Wellchild involved with Cheltenham, and they won the Supreme Novices Hurdle with Shishkin, and obviously knew about Wellchild and its involvement with Cheltenham that year. It's behind closed doors that year, and they gave a huge donation from Shishkin's win. And I then obviously wrote to them and have got to meet them, and they come to Wellchild events now. And then Marie, bless her, came up with this idea because she knew I love Sir Gino. Sir Gino's an absolute rocket. He's an aeroplane of a horse. And so she did this, and I was like, oh my God, just imagine he's really good. And he is really good. And he won at Kempton. I was watching it back the other day when he won on the 27th of December at Kempton and really burst onto the scene as a superstar. You know, I was very choked up thinking, that's a lot of money going to Wellchild off the back of that. And my voice cracked a bit on television, which is a little bit unprofessional, but who cares?
Shows you're human. And I think that's another thing I always go on about is people need to stop thinking everyone's refined and show the human side of it. And I think that's something that's extremely powerful and extremely important. So,
I hope so.
And then lastly is the question that I ask every guest, which actually, interestingly, when we started recording, you already had one lined up 5 seconds after I'd warned you.
I can remember what the question was.
So the last question that I ask every guest is, what's one piece of politically correctness that you really strongly agree with or disagree with?
Well, related to racing, something I'm passionate about in the sport, it's just let me down recently on it, is that one of the great things about racing is that men and women compete on a level playing field. You know, we've got sensational female jockeys. The one event I put up with Aguero winning the Premier League with that goal is Rachel Blackmore winning the Grand National. Winning the Gold Cup and everything was great, but the Grand National is a whole different level. And the pride I took in being able to say in our sport, what other sport can you say it? Not many. That these guys and girls go out and compete on a level playing field. You know, that was Rachel Blackmore up against Harry Cobden, Sean Bowen, all the top jockeys on a level playing field, Paul Townend, and she beat them. She's sensational. But where we've got to get it correct in racing is they're at a disadvantage at the minute, because I've found out since that they don't quite have the same level of facilities, changing facilities and that type of stuff. Some courses are very good, some aren't. And we need to put that right. And that's the political correctness that racing needs to get right. Because if we're going to show off our sport and say that men and women are competing on a level playing field, which fills me with pride, I've now realised that actually, unless we're giving them the best opportunity and the best facilities as well to rival that what the boys have got, then that's not strictly true. So.
Yeah, it means that the girls are technically competing at a disadvantage because they can't prepare the same way the men would.
Not everywhere. Not everywhere. But some need to up their game, because we've got some seriously good female jockeys that deserve better in places. Some racecourses have done really well with it. This political correctness, if we want to get that right, we need to do a bit better.
Completely agree. And I love watching Rachel Blackmore's journey. It's
she's amazing. She's the best. She's the best thing to happen in racing in recent years, Rachel. She's an absolute diamond for me. Definitely.
And also one of my partner's favourite jockeys. So there you go. Keeping the thread going of constantly mentioning Gina. But
well done, Gina. Well, so I look forward to seeing Gina. I'm going to see Gina and you at Linfield.
Definitely. I'll come find you. As I say, it's been an amazing interview and I've really enjoyed it. And thank you so much for coming on, Ed. I cannot thank you enough.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
And of course, we'll link all of Ed's details below. So if you do want to get in contact or check out his stuff, I'm sure many people know him already, but I will link it below. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Not Quite Podcast. Please make sure you follow us on TikTok and Instagram to get regular updates about the podcast. These bandanas make it hurt.